Meeting to order. And let the roll reflect, Mr. Bobo was absent. All of the board members were present. And item 5, public comments related to June 6, 2022 agenda items.
Mr. President, we have one public comment related to agenda items. Crystal Lambert.
All right. Ms. Lambert, are you good with the code of conduct on public comments, or do I need to recite it to you? Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
While yes, the new roll-away mats will meet the required safety standards, it's just not the same. It's not the same for day use, just asking the rest of it. Not to mention the time required to clean and go through these athletes and so much on the way. But I understand the schedule issues. If this is the way it has to be, but now it makes no sense for the varsity. If the mats are now able to be rolled up after use, and there's no need to be off location from the high school, they can simply roll the mats away at the high school. Matter of gym space, but perhaps the freshman or maybe basketball teams to practice. Yes, there will be transportation issues, but that's already the case for the wrestling. However, the best case scenario would be the wrestling team has its own dedicated facility. Another building for practice. Many schools have this. I see that we're spending more money for $40,000 on playground equipment. Can we find enough money to build the rest of them? There certainly seems to be a disparity compared to other schools. This doesn't live up to the standard model. It's hard for these athletes to see the facilities that the other programs get compared to theirs. I ask that you please consider working toward finding a way to move the wrestling team to the high school and finding a permanent solution with the facility.
Thank you. All right. Item 6, consideration and possible action to send notice of proposed termination of the term contract teacher, Mr. Ray Cooper, pursuant to section 21.211 of the Texas Education Code and board policies DFBA legal and DFBA local. Ms. Cordell?
Board, I am recommending consideration and possible action to send notice of proposed termination of the term contract teacher, Mr. Ray Cooper, pursuant to section 21.211 of the Texas Education Code and board policies DFBA legal and DFBA local. However, the Texas Education Code does not provide us this option. The employee tendered his resignation effective immediately today, pursuant to the Texas Education Code and board policies DFE legal and DFE local. The resignation is automatically effective upon receipt. This is because we are in a unique window of time regarding teacher contracts. According to the Texas Education Code, 45 days before the first day of instruction is a period where teachers can resign and the resignation must be automatically accepted. Mr. Cooper's resignation will be documented as in lieu of termination, and we are reporting this to the State Board for Educator certification as well as any other relevant agencies as required by law.
The evidence clearly demonstrated Mr. Cooper's conduct violated the employee standards of conduct and Educator Code of Ethics. This board does not tolerate violations of policies or procedures, and should the law have allowed, the board would have taken immediate action to terminate this evening. All reports required by law have been made to the requisite agencies, and we will cooperate with those investigations to the fullest extent possible.
For the current Lovejoy ISD employees, we appreciate your service and heart for students. However, as the Board of Trustees, we do not and will not tolerate violations of the employee standards of conduct and Educator Code of Ethics, specifically Standard 3.9 of the Educator Code of Ethics, which states, the educator shall refrain from inappropriate communication with a student or minor, including but not limited to electronic communication such as cell phone, text messaging, email, instant messaging, blogging, or other social network communication. Factors that may be considered in assessing whether the communication is inappropriate include, but are not limited to, 1, the nature, purpose, timing, and amount of the communication, 2, the subject matter of the communication, 3, whether the communication was made openly or the educator attempted to conceal the communication, 4, whether the communication could be reasonably interpreted as soliciting sexual contact or a romantic relationship, 5, whether the communication was sexually explicit, and 6, whether the communication involved discussion of the physical or sexual attractiveness or the sexual history, activities, preferences, or fantasies of either the educator or the student.
We just want to remind parents to monitor their students' use of electronic devices. Should you ever be notified or concerned regarding your students' communications, please notify the district as soon as possible. Student safety is a top priority for each of us on the board, as well as the Lovejoy administration.
So given the circumstances, no actions required, no further discussions needed. Correct. Item 7, safety and security presentation.
Good evening. I'm going to ask Casey Littlefield, our head of safety and security, to join me in light of the recent events going on in the state around safety and security of schools. We wanted to give an update to the board and the community about steps that we have taken prior to this year, what we have done this year, and then what we have on the docket, if you will, going forward with safety and security. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Littlefield now, and he's going to take you through that process and what's to come.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As we look at the first slide here, really want to kind of highlight the safety and security program review. So just a recap of our school marshal program for those that may not be aware, we do run the school marshal program, which is a license and credential program within the state of Texas. So we have an internal safety and security department at Lovejoy, and then we have all of those members are licensed through the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement as a school marshal, and that gives us the capability to be armed while we're on site. All 5 school marshals have been through that training, and they're all current and up to date on their licensing requirements. So as we move to the next slide, we really just want to highlight some general safety and security implementations that we've had really since 2018 and moving into today. So really want to highlight the armed security marshals are on all of our campuses, all of our Puster, Hart, Sloan, Willow, and the high school. And then looking at surveillance cameras, we have a robust surveillance camera system at Lovejoy. We have a lot of camera surveillance equipment. So through the years of my experience in safety and security, I feel very comfortable and confident that we have those cameras in the right places. But as with any camera system, there's always capabilities to be enhanced and upgraded with any surveillance program. We have a security vehicle. Our security entrances and vestibules are all secure. We have D-Tex door alarms that prevent propping, employee badges, window film. We have the Raptor visitor management system for our visitors and volunteers that catch us the sex offender alerting tools, as well as other tools that we can implement into that system that would catch protective orders, medical issues, things of that sort. The personal location devices and the Rhino barricade locks were implemented in 2018, and those are great enhancements to our program. And then moving into the next one, just having that stop the bleed, first aid, and AED training to our employees. The trauma bags that we invested in several years ago throughout all of our campuses, our school buses, our commons areas, and then not to mention the training that we give to our employees and students in regards to stop the bleed. Our classroom window perforation, our standard response protocols and reunification method. Obviously, we do the regular drill scheduling to include the normal response protocols, evacuation, hold, lockdown, secure. We do fire drills according to state recommendations and guidelines. And then looking at room mapping within all of our schools was updated. So teachers are able to see fire exits, where their extinguishers, where their EpiPens, where their AEDs are located throughout our entire buildings, as well as our threat assessment model that we have working with our student services department, social media alerting software, and tip lines that we have through our schools. So we have a robust security program in place. And then looking at our 2021-22 accomplishments for this year. So obviously we've talked a lot about safety and security this year. We have had tremendous buy-in from obviously you guys as a board and our cabinet and administration teams. We've seen a tremendous buy-in in our safety and security program this year. Our department structure. So obviously you guys know that I was placed as the head of safety and security. So that gives us the capability now to have that structure in place and gives me the ability to really highlight their strengths and weaknesses and grow our school marshal team from what it is today to a better place, which is great from a leadership perspective. Programmatic updates, obviously, you guys know we went from kind of a hybrid guardian to specifically the marshal program, so we're aligned with those state guidelines. And then we updated our gear. Our front office security, we gave camera visibility to all of our front desks. We gave Raptor alerting tools so they're able to literally push a button and have a school marshal to them within seconds. Our police and fire relations have gotten tremendously better. I'm currently working with the police and fire departments for tomorrow's event. So we just seen great things happening there. We've had a lot of meetings and get-togethers and breakfasts and things like that. So just really great on that front. The radios we've talked heavily on, but we do have some additional ones on the way. So maybe we're looking at getting our nurses that capability, and then we can always grow that radio system that we have. Our emergency communications capabilities we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. Our internal training, our gun range membership that we got this year was obviously a huge benefit for us. So thank you for that. And then external training. Our Operation Unite event is tomorrow, so we're looking forward to that. It's going to be a quick event, but we feel really excited. I can tell you in the time frame that I've spent planning for Operation Unite, I've learned a ton just myself, and so we're learning as we go, even before the event begins, on what we need to enhance and grow in terms of our emergency management at Lovejoy. Our website creation just gives our community the opportunity to really get to know our school marshals, and so just being more transparent about who we are and what we stand for, and having just a capability for them there. Our event security has I think really gotten better over the past year. We've done a lot more planning, briefing. We've gotten people involved that haven't always been involved in those events, and really we're going to just continue to grow that. So we have a lot of fine arts. We have a lot of things going on at Lovejoy with event management, and we understand that. So we're going to get there quickly. And then program enhancements, drills and exercises, clubs that we have. The Catch My Breath program, we implemented that this year at Sloan Creek as a pilot program. It's an anti-vaping program. George, our school marshal there at Sloan, taught it and did a phenomenal job teaching that program. We got a lot of great feedback on that program. So we're excited about growing that program into Sloan and the middle school level. Our emergency communication completion. So if you guys look at this list, I mean, this really highlights a lot of what we have in terms of emergency communication. And I was telling somebody this today that, where I see us being a little bit different from other school districts, our staff members have the ability to push a button and within 30 seconds to 45 seconds have an armed person there to address a need. So when I look at what other school districts have, that's not always the case. Our Raptor distress buttons with our front ends, our communications with our radios. Lucas Fire has a radio that they can turn on in the event they're responding on site to our campus and immediately connect with the person that can get them to the right place. Our patch services, our group reminds, our conference bridges, our contact cards. We've just really enhanced the way that we can communicate quickly. And we've learned, obviously, in the past couple of weeks how quick communication needs to happen. And I feel very confident that we'll get the right people there very quickly if an issue ever arose. Operation Unite, so this event is tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We're going to start the evacuation part at Hart. We're going to do a mock exercise for those of you that don't know. We're going to do an evacuation. We're going to turn that into a transport from our busing system over to the high school, where we will do a reunification at the multipurpose building at the high school. We have about 26 volunteers, which honestly is great. Like we had asked for up to 200, but no more. 26 we're very happy with, because it doesn't matter if there's 26 or 200. We're still going to run through those protocols and communications capabilities the same way we would. So we're very happy with that. And then police, the Fairview Police Department, Collin County Sheriff's Office, the Lucas Fire Department, and the Fairview Fire Department will all be conducting their own in-house training after our event at Hart tomorrow. So really looking at that, that was a way for us to get them onto our campuses, let them use our facility, and then slowly but surely we'll incorporate ourselves into that training as we move forward. So they will be doing that over at Hart from around 9 to 11. So we've gotten communication out to the public to be on the lookout for a large amount of emergency vehicles on our campuses. So that's going to be a good event for them. And really, when you look at them from those 4 departments, this is a great opportunity for them to merge, not only just with the school district, but for those 4 departments to get together and train is a big win for them, and they're happy and excited about that. Upcoming enhancements and training. So we were fortunate to be grant recipients. We were able to get the Raptor Emergency Management, which is an accountability reunification software, and then our gear with our body armor grant that we received. So we're going to be doing that at the midsummer. So we're looking forward to that. And then doing some more internal training. And then the marshals, as you see up there, like as in my position, my goal will be to grow the marshal team in all kinds of avenues. So whether that's better computer skills, whether that's enhanced shooting capabilities, you name it. In the next year, my goal will be to get them to a position where they're super excited and they're ready to move forward in their careers and grow them as individuals. And then the We Walk the Walk program, just getting police and fire into our buildings and not just talking about it. That is our goal, is to make sure they show up at our campuses and have that coffee and do their reports and get onto our campuses. So what's next? So I think just looking at, we're not going to really deep dive into what we're looking at, but I can tell you there's a lot on the plate. I've been contacted, as you can imagine, by 1,000 different vendors trying to get us involved in their product, and really looking at technology is, I think, going to be a big win for us in the future. Training, enhanced training for the Marshall team's a big win. And ultimately, if we can get the right communication, the right people there quickly, the people that can handle a situation and be really, really well trained, that's our goal. And then this other stuff is just an added benefit. So just threw this in there. This moving into next year, we are going to go to an armor that we wear every day. And I think after looking at the recent events, it's important for us to be able, if we ever were to have to deal with the situation, to be ready to deal with that situation as it happens. Like, we don't have time to grab gear. And so when you look at this, this is what the police departments have been asking from us for a while. They want to be able to see who we are when they show up to our campuses, and it allows us to carry gear that we've never been able to carry. If I need access to a key to get into a door, then that key needs to be on me, right? And so I think it's important. And we're just going to move forward and have that capability with our gear going forward. So. Yep.
One of the things Casey and I have been discussing is that there's not one person who is responsible for safety and security. It's every student, every teacher, every staff member, everybody in this, every parent. When we put procedures in place, we need people to do what we ask, but we're not doing it to make it difficult. We're doing it to keep everybody safe. And we can't expect teachers and staff and students to know what to do. So we need to educate them on the things that they can do, whether it's if they see a teacher walking up to the door. We have really trusting students, and they have familiarity with our staff members. But if a staff member needs to be on the campus, they need to badge in. We don't need to open up the door for them. Or even if it's a neighbor who's coming up and they think the neighbor should be there, they need to go through the routine or the process of getting on our campus. So simple things like that. We can go out and buy, as you know, countless number of safety and security equipment, hardware, software. But until we look internally and do the right things internally, we're just spending money on stuff that may or may not fit into what we're trying to do. So we have to have good policies and procedures on our campuses and in our schools first. Any questions?
I just wanted to say thank you. I say this every year, but this is one of the things I'm the most proud of since I've been serving on the board. This was an idea in 2017. And Casey, thank you to you and your team. Kevin, thank you to you for leading. Katie, for supporting. It's awesome to see Lovejoy lead in just another facet. We always have found ways to do that in the fine arts, the academics, athletics, but to do it in this is amazing. And I think one of the keys is that it's all of us, and these marshals truly care, and y'all have that presence, you know about kids, you know what's going on with them. You pick up on things. I didn't even know about the vaping thing. That's a great program. I mean, little things for well-being, not just having the right gear and being able to gun a guy down if heaven forbid. So thank you for all that. I'm just super, super grateful.
I think it's important to know that there is not one bad product out there. It just may not be right for us right now, you know, and what our vision is to keep our kids safe. Sometime it may be right. It just may not be right now.
Appreciate the vest acquisition and the improvements there for you all and for all of us. Also, just wanted to point out the deliberate effort to continue to grow the relationship between our local agencies. And in the short period of time we've been focused on that, the enhancement to those relationships continues to grow. And the more we can do this upcoming year and this summer to continue to foster that and to grow that, where we can train together and also as a community support those folks the way they should be, to continue to draw them to support us and work together. I just appreciate that. I think that's a huge component of our success, and especially on this last part of the school year when we asked and they answered. And so hopefully convey to them our appreciation. Probably can't say that enough. So.
When you can tell they're excited to be on our campuses too. They want to be there. There's not a lot of crime that goes on in Fairview PD. They want to be a part of this community, and the most impactful way and the most visible way they can do that is on our schools. They know our kids, they know our families, and they want to protect us. And
The other thing that might, as we continue to talk about updates to safety and security, is helping educate on the different mechanisms of social media communication and things like that. So maybe resources that we can put into that. And then I lost my other thought. Maybe it'll come back to me.
it was a good one though.
Oh, the vaping. Thank you for that. Anything more we can do to continue to grow awareness, understanding, education, and the lack of tolerance for vaping on our campuses, I would be grateful for personally. And I think that it would be in the best interest of our community as we continue. So I appreciate that being brought up in safety and security, and appreciate any efforts in the future in regards to that. All right. Any other questions? Item 8, attendance update.
Since we have wrapped up the school year, I wanted to give you an update on how we ended the school year attendance-wise. I have a date on this chart. It's kind of a little bit hard to see, but I have a date of February 7th. The reason I chose that date, February 7th, is that's when I gave the attendance update at the February board workshop. So that's why that's the magical date. This chart shows the very bottom bar for each of the campuses in the district is the numbers on the very light pink color are the numbers that I shared with you in February. So for instance, Puster Elementary, which is the top campus up there, at that time on February 7th, their ADA for that part of the year was 93.69%. The middle bar is our ADA, or our attendance, from February 7th up until May 27th, which is our last day of school. So you can see on each and every one of the campuses, from the very bottom, the light pink bar, to the middle bar, every one of our attendance, our ADA percentage rates increased, and increased by a pretty good bit. The very top one is our end of year ADA, our cumulative ADA for the entire year. So you can see That's going to be the average of the two bottom ones. So the district at the bottom on February 7th, it was reported that our ADA was 93.78%. Between February 7th and May 27th, we increased that to 95.14% for a total overall ADA year for the year of 94.36. So we shared this with the principals the other day. They accredited it to some healthy competition because they were discussing who was going to get the best attendance each week. And I think they used that as a little bit of motivation. They shared it with their parents, shared it with their students, and a little bit of healthy competition is never a bad thing. So it worked. Whatever they did, it worked.
Questions on attendance? Thank you.
Mhm.
Item 9, Dr. Duplessis, budget and proposed tax rate update.
Good evening. We are excited to share with you our last budget update before we enter the phase of budget and proposed tax rate adoption at our next meeting on June 20th. I've asked Thomas Willman to join us. He's our Senior Director of Financial Sustainability. And we'll be reviewing several of the same topics we've talked about before with some updates and some information about what we will be proposing on the 20th for adoption. So we'll be covering another update on our current year projection and where we think we will finish out as of June 30th. We'll talk about our projection through fiscal year 26 and our final draft of the budget for 22-23. So as you'll recall, our theme this year for the budget process was reframing our story. And so we really wanted to develop that around our 3 focus areas of legacy of excellence, future ready students, and of course, financial sustainability. So we're excited to present to you this evening what we are proposing to bring to you on the 20th for adoption, because I truly believe that all the work that's gone into this on behalf of the district as a whole through many stakeholder groups, whether that was the Financial Sustainability Committee, whether that was staff who were involved in zero-based budgeting, whether that's feedback from our State of the District meetings. There have been a whole lot of people involved in the work that was required to start the process of reframing our story. So I do want to thank those that have been a part of this, because it is definitely a collective effort. So we began that work in November, and that was when we started looking at where we were for the current year and our projections, and we followed quite a few different developments up until now. So as we look at this year, we're going to talk about those projection updates. These are the major milestones from the current fiscal year, and so you can kind of track some of the things that have been that have stood out as far as increases or decreases compared to the adopted budget. And the detail of that is provided here in this summary. Yes.
The winter storm claims, that 862,000, is that, so that was different than what we expected in the adopted budget. And that's just a big number that I don't remember us talking about in detail. Is that beyond what we were able to recoup from insurance? And
So we recognized some of that revenue from the storm damage in last fiscal year. And so the expenditures were realized in the current fiscal year, and the revenue was not.
So we recouped a big portion. So that big number, we had more revenue last year to offset that, but we're recognizing the expenses this year.
Correct.
Got it.
Mhm.
Similar questions. On the April projection, we had revenue that offset those expenses, and that's just a timing thing that moved to the prior year.
Correct. We did not realize it had been recognized in the prior year, so we had to correct that.
Thank you.
Mhm. And so some of the additional detail is provided there. Our enrollment, obviously you'll see the delta there from the revenue that was projected in the expenses. So that was one of the more significant changes, in addition to, like you pointed out, the winter storm claim. And so some of the other items that we've discussed prior to that were big differences For example, would have been the payroll. We were to the positive on the payroll side of almost 700,000. And then ESSER and other grants. You probably will notice that that did change from prior months as well, because we had listed some of the ESSER recovery that we were expecting as a prior period adjustment, so it didn't appear in the current year. We've been meeting with our audit firm in preparation for fiscal year end and discussing anything that we might need to modify, and he suggested that we need to recognize that revenue in the current year and not as a prior period adjustment, even though that's when the expenditures occurred. So we've made that adjusting entry, and so you'll see that change there. Following all of these adjustments, we're expecting to end the current fiscal year to the positive by about $1.3 million. And so we are going to present to you the fully developed plant almost as we get into June 20th and our required date for our budget adoption going into 22-23. And just quickly wanted to kind of revisit, we've talked about our assumptions every month and the things that are being input into our formulas and our projections. And as we built this budget, but as we present this final draft, we wanted to just remind everybody what those assumptions were. So we've updated this projection continually as we have received updated information from the appraisal district in terms of what our values are and our expected collections. So we've continued to adjust for that. We have used the demographer's projection for that low to moderate enrollment growth. We have used our adjusted TPAR attendance rate for the first 4-6 weeks and our actuals for the 5th and 6th. And again, for fiscal year 22-23, we're assuming a 95.5% attendance rate and 96% in future years. We've input about $1.3 million in staffing efficiency savings that we've worked through as we reviewed the information that the TASB group came to us with in terms of staffing efficiencies that they recommended, and then we refined and reviewed and made adjustments for next year. This also includes the update to the Lovejoy Scholar Program that was approved to be put into place for 22-23. This also includes the compensation adjustments that we've discussed for teachers, librarians, and nurses, rolling that 21-22 current year step increase that they received via supplemental pay in November would be rolled into their base salary for next year. And then their step increase for next year would be an additional 1% across the board for all teachers, librarians, and nurses. All other staff would receive a 1% increase for next year. We've also included the compensation adjustments that were recommended as a result of the equity and market comparisons that were conducted earlier this year. In this projection, we've also included a 2% compensation increase for 23-24 and beyond. And again, as we've kind of continually reviewed this, that won't affect next fiscal year, but as we've made some gains, we wanted to look at what those adjustments could be. This does also include the assumption that we're retaining that new zero-based budget level in future years. And so we will be monitoring things like inflation and cost increases going into next year. So this is our baseline projection model for the general fund, excluding student nutrition. And so we've reviewed this several times before, but our fiscal year 21-22 again is updated there. We're estimating that when we finish out this fiscal year, we would have about 87 days of fund balance remaining. So made some progress from the 74 that we closed out 2021 with. And based on all of the assumptions that I shared with you for this baseline projection, we would estimate that by fiscal year 26, because of the decrease in enrollment that the demographer projected, we're looking at being down to about 61 days of fund balance by fiscal year 26. So really having that long-term model has helped us kind of look at what the implications of all of the assumptions that we discussed would be in that area. I also wanted to mention that on the fiscal year 23, you'll see the tax rate is at 0.9429 for the M&O tax rate and 50 cents for the INS tax rate for a total of $1.4429. That is including an estimated compression rate that we have not yet received from the state. So when we review our budget on June 20th, we have to estimate what that compression will be, and we use a state estimate that's provided through some of the folks that create templates for estimating state revenue. But we won't know what the actual amount will be until later on when we get that information back from TEA. So right now, we use the same projection that most school districts would use on what that rate would be. This next projection shows you what same idea would look like with the general fund excluding student nutrition, with the passage of a voter approved tax ratification election that would allow us to recoup the 3.17 copper pennies that are still available to Lovejoy ISD. So if we include that rate, you'll see the rate difference in fiscal year 23 to 147.46, simply the same rate with those extra 3.17 pennies. And so then you can track year over year what would occur with our revenue and expenditures as a result. If that were included, then you would see by fiscal year 26, we would end with 82 days of fund balance. So that definitely increases that amount.
So 67 days will not cash flow us, correct?
That's correct. We had 74 days of fund balance when we started this year, and we were at the December timeframe reviewing our cash balances to determine if we were going to be viable for December payroll.
Right.
So I truly feel if we were at that 61 amount, we would not be able to likely
Right.
make any payrolls in December without a loan.
Yep.
So not to belabor this point, but can you explain again why our cash flows are tight?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we rely heavily on local tax collections to fund our schools. Each school district has a mix of state revenue and local collections that fund the school district. In Lovejoy ISD, we have a large amount of property wealth, so to speak. So we rely on the local collections. The state does not kick in as much of our revenue as other districts may have. So when we start our year at July 1st and then school starts, we have to fund all of those things kind of up front until tax collections start coming in. And most people aren't paying their taxes early. So if we're lucky, they start coming in some real time in December, January timeframe. And so we have to have enough cash on hand to float during that time period. And that's why that amount, normally GFOA would recommend 90 days of fund balance as a minimum, and then adjusting that number of days according to the cash flow of your organization. So for us, they would probably recommend something closer to 120 days. So we did take a look at a couple of other items just as we track potential influences. And so, as I mentioned, we did have an increase in compensation, which is obviously our largest expenditure in this projection. But we also looked at the impact of non-personnel inflationary increases. And so this is just an additive that you can look at in terms of sensitivity. If, for example, we had a 2% increase in non-personnel expenditures during any of those given years that you see listed from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 26, you can see what that dollar amount would net. So again, we just kind of wanted to show you what the sensitivity of those non-payroll inflationary expenses could be. And again, we'll continue to monitor not only what that increase may be as we revise our projections. Again, next year we'll start in the November timeframe looking at projections each month. But we also want to look at the change in the number of days of fund balance that would net, right, if we have to incur those additional expenses. So we run these models so that we can check and see what those potential impacts would be. So this is the proposed 22-23 functional expense budget. This includes all funds from student nutrition, general fund, athletics, and debt service. So this is a combined view, and we'll show you kind of a delineated view in the next several slides as well. But you will see that we adopt the budget by fund and function. So the funds identified, and you'll see the function down the left side in terms of what each of these items are. You'll see the adopted 21-22 budget in the first column. You'll see our proposed 22-23 budget in the second column, and basically the change that would occur from last year's adopted to next year's proposed budget. So if you review those items, you'll notice that all of our expenses compared to last year in this proposed budget are lowered. So our instruction expenses, our instructional support expenses, our central administration expenses, and our district operations expenses are all lowered compared to last year's adopted budget. You may notice that there's one item, our debt service is increasing, and that's something that we're looking at in terms of just recognizing the amount of revenue that we'll receive as a result of our rate will allow us options to pay down our debt early. And if you'll remember back to the first rating that we reviewed in October, that was one of the items that Lovejoy did not score as well as some other districts in the state on. So that will be an option that we'll have available to us next year. The other item that you'll notice that went up under the other category, you'll see a 91. That is our recapture payment. So that does go up as a result of our increase in local property values, which increases our local collections. So you'll see that increase on the local revenue at the bottom from last adopted budget to this year. But you don't see the increase in recapture. That's where that's recognized on that line 91. So I just kind of wanted to explain what some of the big increases or decreases were compared to last year. I think one other item I would point out is under 61, community service. You'll see a fairly significant increase from adopted 21-22 budget to proposed 22-23. That is because we moved the Child Development Center into general fund. So that's what that difference is.
I really appreciate it listed like this. It's really good. Thank you for providing that. It's very good.
That's a little bit hard to see, but without kind of looking back, it's kind of hard to have something to compare to as well. We've had some good feedback on that, so thank you. So this next slide shows you the similar layout of information, similar comparison to last year, but this is really just isolated down to the general fund. And so these numbers are just a little bit more refined than when we were working on that long-term projection. Really the only thing that's kind of more refined is we run very detailed staffing models with real a lot of work that Deanne does around position management, making sure we've accounted for every individual and what that compensation equals for next year so we can get just as precise as we possibly can be. So this is very refined data. We run lots of updates and lots of models to be as accurate as we can be. And so this shows you what that general fund basis is. So you'll see at the bottom of the proposed 22-23 budget that we're looking at a positive net position of a little over $2 million for next fiscal year. So that's going to allow us some of that additional recovery that you saw in the projection that we're going to need for those future years. We also have the student nutrition budget. So the board adopts the general fund, the student nutrition, and the debt service budget. So the student nutrition budget is balanced as it was this year. But it is a little bit lower. So we had the seamless summer option program this year that allowed for free meals at the elementaries and intermediate schools. That has not been approved for next year. So we are assuming that we'll go back to the national school lunch program there, which might reasonably have a slight decrease in participation. We're hoping that's not true. But we have looked at not only what the participation could slightly decrease at if there's not free meals, but also we've looked at things like supply costs and tried to estimate what we think that's going to look like. It's been a very interesting year. So that is the proposed budget for next year for student nutrition. And last but not least is our debt service budget. So again, I've kind of described the difference between the 21-22 and the 22-23 budget as a result of the property values going up. We'll reap more on the debt service side, and that will allow us some good options to consider that we'll probably be discussing in more detail in the following couple months on trying to lower our debt load. So in terms of highlights, I think I mentioned before that we've had a number of efficiencies that were implemented this year, whether that was from staffing or budget savings, trying to be cognizant of those expenditures that we have. And if they're necessary, if they're part of what we're leading for, then absolutely we're going to do it. But what are those savings opportunities that we can grab? And so we have about $2.3 million baked into this that we've been working on from this year and planning for next year. So I'm really excited about that. I think that involved a lot of people doing a lot of hard work. The current base projection that we share does result in a deficit budget in fiscal year 24 and 82 days of fund balance in fiscal year 25. But again, that 61 days of fund balance in fiscal year 26 would definitely represent a payroll hardship. The VATRE projection results in a deficit budget not until fiscal year 25 to 26 and fund balance over 90 days through the entire projection. So those are kind of the differences between the two. And just a couple of other highlights. If we happen to have a 1% decrease in our ADA, that does equal $285,000. So that's just something we're cognizant of. Our property values continue to increase. So when we look at our outer years, we know that that will yield more in terms of our revenue on the tier 2 side. But combined with enrollment decreasing, that does result in some small increases in recapture on the tier 2 side. But the majority of the increases you'll see in recapture are a result of property values increasing, ADA decreasing. But it still yields quite a bit of net revenue to the positive for additional copper pennies. And we'll explain more of that detail in a moment. Any questions so far? Okay. I've asked Thomas to share some information kind of explaining the different components of state revenue, what the levers are, and what the increases and decreases based on our projections are.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, and thank you for having me. As Jennifer mentioned, let me see if I can figure this out. I hope to share tonight a deeper dive into our state funding and stemming from questions from previous meetings around our increase recapture in the future. So just walking through and seeing what the major drivers are of our state and local funding and the increased recapture within our model. Sorry, I am a little nervous speaking in front of a crowd, so we'll overcome it here soon, hopefully. So as we see here, our state funding is broken down into 2 tiers. We have tier 1 funding and tier 2 funding, and our tier 1 funding pretty much covers the cost of providing basic education and is largely driven based off of student count. So our student enrollment and their average daily attendance, plus the additional supplemental payments that we receive for the different student populations. So for the students we provide special ed to, the students who participate in CTE or GT, we get additional funding. So that all makes up tier 1 funding, which makes up 83% of our total funding in next year's budget. Our tier 2 funding is broken down into 2 levels. That is golden and copper pennies that Jennifer had alluded to. And this is primarily driven based off of our tax effort. There is a quantity piece to it where student count does help drive it. And that is considered our WADA, or weighted average daily attendance. So that's essentially looking at it and saying that our overall tier 1 funding, if we want to look at it from a basic allotment, how much is the state funding on a weighted average daily attendance? That will always exceed our ADA because our total tier 1 funding is more than just our ADA times our basic allotment. So as Jennifer mentioned, with our tier 1 funding and our just overall local share compared to the state share, what I'm trying to show here is what is the total funding. So the green bars represent how much total funding in tier 1 we receive from our student count times the basic allotment plus the special populations. And then comparing that up against the blue shade of the share between local tax base and the state funding. So you can see in the current year, we anticipate that the state will help fund roughly 1/10 of the overall cost, or more than 10% of the overall funding. But then in the future, you can see as our property values increase, our tax share, our tax-based share is equaling to or exceeding the total tier 1 funding allowed by the state. So what this reflects is showing that from current year to next year, our student count is dropping, but over time, it's pretty consistent, slightly declining, but overall it's within, 10 to 20, so pretty flat over time. But then also you see that our total funding, the rebars are pretty flat over time as well. That's because in our model, we're not assuming any inflationary increase to the basic allotment. So that's keeping our total funding flat. And then when we look at our property values increasing, we start seeing our local shares increasing. This is why we're starting to see an increase in recapture in the future. It's not necessarily tied to VATRE because the state sets the maximum compressed rate. So it's regardless of if we move forward with the VATRE or not, our tier 1 funding will remain the same, therefore leading to in the future our recapture increasing. So when we look at our tier 2 funding, this is based off a tax effort. We can maximize up to 19 additional pennies from the maximum compressed rate. We are currently only at, 13.83 of the 19, or is that 9 plus, or 8 plus 5, 13.83? Because we're currently maximizing all 8 golden pennies and currently at the 5.83 copper pennies. So if we want, the golden pennies are not subject to recapture. So based off of the guaranteed yield in our WADA, our property share, or property tax collection is roughly about 3/4 of the funding. And then you see over time, it kind of increases as the property value goes up. But then our copper pennies are subject to recapture. And if we maximize the 3.17 pennies, we will see an increase, a net increase of about 500K, 800K in increase revenue and 300K increase in recapture in the current year. And the next slide kind of breaks out without the VRTRE. So when you see the 2023, you see the 1.4 million green versus the 2.2. That's the 800K increase in revenue in the recapture. And then as you see over time, as property value increases, you see the 2.2 kind of remains consistent, but our tax share is increasing. So we're getting that tax increase, but we're seeing equal dollar amount and recapture increase each year. So to summarize in general, what I'm trying to show here is that what we're seeing is the increase in our recapture is really due to our flat enrollment student count, our flat funding, and our increased property value. So the only way we'll see a decrease in recapture, but see a benefit in increased revenue is going to be based off of the state approving an inflationary increase in revenue in the basic allotment, or increased enrollment or increased participation in the different programs that provide supplemental funding.
So intuition or other mechanisms of understanding, are there discussions at the state level around inflationary increases? Because obviously we're dealing with that. Any of that happening?
Not that I'm aware of.
I can tell you, we recently had a meeting at Region 10 with one representative from TEA and a couple of other leaders in the Austin area. We continue as financial officers and school districts to ask about the basic allotment and a potential increase, especially districts like us that didn't receive an influx of ESSER funding. It's really kind of unleveled our playing field. So we did ask, I did ask the question about that, and essentially their response was that while they would agree that an increase in the basic allotment would be beneficial for all school districts, that they feel like the legislature is more likely to do special funding for special programs rather than a basic allotment increase.
A lot of these projections are very dependent on the demographic projections that going out even a couple of years at this point is fuzzy, the way I think about it, as far as what the reality will hold. So as we go down this path and we look at the possibility of a VATRE, I think I understand now what that means to propose it. If all of a sudden down the road, our demographics are more favorable than we are anticipating and we have a lot more enrollment, what is the process? If we're dealing with a lot of surpluses and things like that, what's the process to go the other way if we're so blessed?
You could adjust the tax rate in future, but if we'll go back, let me see if I can get back to the projection. Okay, so if we look at our projection and the difference, we're still at 82 days of fund balance with the VATRE in fiscal year 26.
That's my point. That's assuming
Assuming that we
flat or
have that reduction.
decreasing enrollment, right? What if
Mhm.
our enrollment stays closer to the 4,300 that we're going to have next year versus decreasing in years and years and years, right? I mean, so
Right.
that's the big uncertainty about that number would change substantially if the enrollment's higher than what we're projecting on here. And maybe the VATRE isn't as necessary as it would look based on this, right? So I think we need to plan conservatively, right? We need to plan based on what we think is realistic, based on what the demographers have presented to us. But I also want to know, what does it mean if things turn out better than expected, and what do our options look like in future years in that scenario?
And so when we reviewed kind of the demographer's projection, we talked about some of the differences between low and moderate and what we've seen kind of in the projection since COVID. Really the only significant year that you'll see a decrease up there is next year at 133 students. After that, it's really not 29, 25, 27 students. That's not changing really the game very much for us as a district. So I just think that we could certainly run numbers on different figures and.
No, and that's not what I'm not trying to second guess the demographer. I think they know what they're doing in that world. I think that there could be trends that continue to change, just like they have over the last couple of years, that a lot of things are unexpected. Neighborhoods could start to turn over that haven't at a higher rate. Anything could happen. I guess if we go down this road of a VATRE, which I think is prudent based on what you've presented, that's my first kind of, I think that's what we need to do. I just want to start thinking about, okay, is there a process down the road of reversing that if it becomes apparent years from now that it wasn't as necessary as we thought it was going to be? Am I asking that the right way?
You could alter the tax rate again in the future if you wish to. I still think in some ways our projection is fairly conservative because we haven't accounted for much in terms of inflationary increases across the board for non-payroll expenses. And because we have, we've included the compensation we're proposing for next year, and then 2% after that. But I think I know that I've seen that compensation continues to be a concern for all of our stakeholders. So I think there are options that if, there would have to be some discussion on which of those
Building to
would be the
100
priority,
well,
right?
And also, we're just talking about building to 90 days of fund balance. If we really want to get to 120 days, that's a maybe it just accelerates that process.
Right.
Where we ended this year versus the 95.5 that's in the current budget. So I think it was good to lower it from the historical average. How are we feeling about 95 based on where we ended this year?
It's a good question. So we know that essentially the 1% is what, a $285,000 swing. So let's say, if we got to the 95, which is a little closer to where we were this year, that's $140,000. That could be a potential swing in next year's budget. So I think that the 95.5 that we put in shows that we have some goals and some strategies that we want to implement around attendance. But we are also recognizing that it's not going to happen overnight, and we need to not, build our budget around too hopeful of a projection. But that's a fair question. I think we have to continue to monitor that.
It's like the biggest opportunity still at the high school.
Yes, that's correct. And that's
What
probably,
did you say, Jake?
So it looks like the biggest opportunities at the high school.
so any high school parents, I know I feel the same way.
More a question on the outer year projection. Is that 2% salary increase for teachers going to get us where we need to be from a market perspective?
That is a fabulous question. So what we did this year when we did our compensation assessment is because of all of the data that you have to gather, we were comparing last year's information. So we were comparing not current year, but last year information for all of our positions across the board. And we're kind of committed to doing that same, process year over year and looking at what that would be. So we don't know, frankly, what that would look like next year. So we know that we built 2% increase in from the current year. We know when we did the assessment for last year's teacher salaries that we were within range for most of our 5-year increments. But we also know that a lot has changed in terms of what our surrounding districts are doing. I think it will be very incumbent upon us. And that's an area that I've kind of been curious about when we talk about compensation next year. It's likely that there will be more items could show up on the market comparison side than what showed up this year.
Given the utilization of ESSER funding, which was certainly allocated for one particular purpose and maybe being utilized for another, I would think that could impact that substantially.
And a lot of districts that are using ESSER funds for compensation are using at least a portion of them for one-time bonuses. And so though that portion of those increases will likely go away
Right.
for those folks.
I think you've said, we'll call out again that the outer year projection does not include any increase in expenses. And it includes the 2% raise, which may not be market at this point. So we still have some conservatism on the expenses that we might need to be able to cover with additional incoming revenue.
That's correct.
Right.
So it's a step plus the 2% is what we're projecting each year.
So
Is that what
so our compensation projection for next year is rolling in the supplemental step they received this year, plus a 1% across the board step increase for next year. In the future years, we're counting that step increase as a 2% step across the board.
So it's
It's 2% each year.
just 2%,
Is that
not
right?
Cumulatively.
cumulative. Got it.
Is this same level of detail where you're comparing adopted 21 budget to proposed? Can we also see actuals for 21? Is that capable, or do we need to wait till you get all the way through your?
We can certainly add the actuals in. I was concerned about your eyes, but absolutely we can add that column in for the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jennifer.
Thank
And
you.
Thomas, great job. Item 10, Dr. Duplessis, you're still up with us?
Still here.
Compensation plan update.
So one of the things that we adopt along with our budget and proposed tax rate at the next board meeting on the 20th is our compensation plan for 22-23. So we did want to review this information in preparation for that. And again, our focus is on reframing our story. And when we reflect back to the board budget workshop, one of the budget priorities right after fund balance so that we could have financial sustainability was compensation. So we wanted to take a very close look at what our practices are around compensation, what adjustments we may need to be able to make for next year. And again, we talked about our process and the things that went into place in terms of our market assessments and our reviews of all of those items. And so we just wanted to share a brief on the updates for next year. So the alignment that we made with the projections and the forecast that we just shared is with this compensation. So again, the step increase after rolling in the supplemental pay from this year would be that 1%. And so a sample is provided here of what that looks like. So for, say, a 21-22 teacher who happens to be on step 3, they're earning $54,379. and expecting that step rolled in plus the 1% increase. So they could expect to earn the 55,358 in 22-23. And then they would be on step 4. And we'll update that table to reflect the appropriate numbers after that 1% increase. So just kind of wanted to make sure people understood. I know there were a lot of questions this last year about whether or not they advanced that step. And again, we are looking at implementing the market assessment. 5 out of 81 positions were identified as lagging the market by 5% or more. And those are the adjustments that would be made. And those areas were in student nutrition, custodial, computer techs, maintenance, and several of those areas. Additional market adjustments were reviewed for 33 other related or difficult to hire positions that we've experienced this year. And so when we looked at the compensation plan, those ranges were just adjusted accordingly. Other revisions that we made for the 22-23 compensation plan, we have a clause in our current compensation plan that any employee that's hired within 90 days of the end of the school year basically is not eligible for the % increase that goes into the next year. So after discussion with leadership, we've decided to reduce that to 45 days, just because 90 days seemed like a long time for people to be on board and then not receive that compensation increase for next year. So we felt like that might be a benefit to employees that come in that time frame. A couple other things will change in terms of what you see, but we wanted to make sure people understood some of those changes. So for example, we have some current teachers that earn a STEM stipend. That stipend as listed has been removed from the compensation plan, but those current employees will still receive that stipend. We're just removing it for future use. So we wanted to make sure that that was understood. The layout of the hiring ranges and some of the position titles essentially have been adjusted to reflect changes that were made this year. And then the guest educator pay for day 22 and over is changed to $250 a day. And we did change our licensed speech pathologist substitute pay to $150 a day. And that was a result of some of what we saw in that compensation assessment. We just didn't have anybody in place at the time to trigger any changes, but we did change it in the compensation plan. So hopefully that will help us in the future. A few of the stipends have been adjusted based on those market comparisons and program responsibilities. And those folks have been communicated with as others have looked at what their duties are. Are you still continuing to do the duties for which you received your stipend and those type of things? So again, we've included a draft of the compensation plan, but wanted to make sure that we just hit some of the highlights and shared those with you. So do you have any questions?
Any other questions? Board? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 11, consider and act on Puster Playground project.
So we shared back in the workshop a few of the wonderful words that our friends at Puster shared about their playground. And I won't revisit all of those, but they're provided in this presentation that we shared last meeting, and that is also in your book. But we did seek quotes for additional playground equipment from for Puster, and the best value that we received in terms of those proposals was from Lee Park and Play for $129,395. That includes an additional play structure and swings. It also includes one inclusive swing, and so we've had some discussion about how we want to kind of place and design those items so that that new area is as inviting as possible for all of our students. So I'm pretty excited about the opportunity. We are proposing that we would fund that additional equipment out of the remaining 2017 and 2019 series bonds for which Puster was included as an authorized site. So our recommendation would be approval of the Puster Playground project as presented.
I appreciate that when we passed those bonds, we had certainly those bonds were allocated to a certain list of projects that met a criteria and a threshold that was for us to invest this money into. And so as we look at all these projects and we hear all these different things and we look at these ideas, we have to stay consistent with what that bond was passed for. And so I'm glad that we're able to do this in that bond series. We're fortunate to be able to do that.
I just want to clarify. You assessed all playgrounds and this is where the need is.
That's correct. So we did go out and actually observe playground time at both campuses. It was actually quite a pleasure. But they had less equipment and definitely more students during the time frame at Puster than say at Hart. Mhm.
Great. I have one question. So when my kids were here at Lovejoy, it's a big focus to get this shade cover over at the unit. And I was just curious, with Puster and Hart, neither one have that shade cover. Is that something that we would look at in a future capital plan or something like that?
It's certainly something we could look at in future capital planning, or I know sometimes there are special donations or projects, and that could definitely be considered. Mhm. I believe the play structure that we're proposing at Puster actually has like not the entire shade structure, but you know, the shade structure over that portion of it, but not an entire shade structure.
Is it similar to the size of the play structure that's on Puster's campus right now? Or is it bigger or?
It's about the same size as the existing one. Mhm.
To Julie's point, and I think y'all told us when this is coming. I know we're just trying to get the budget and everything done. It might be helpful to, and I know y'all have something in the works, have a plan of assessing kind of everything we've done, what we need, where there are any other gaps. I know we're trying to kind of plug holes as things come up, but that might help address like shade at elementaries or anything else that might, because I don't remember when we last had that. I don't know. Any, do you remember?
Assessment of projects?
Yeah, just of like kind of state of the.
Well, we reviewed what those original last year. Remember they brought forward what
list
was,
of what was funded and what wasn't.
yeah, that's the last thing I
But
can
like maybe
remember.
a needs assessed with the committee. And
Yeah, I don't remember that.
No, they brought forward, we analyzed what that committee came forward with, the most important things that we needed. That's the last thing I remember.
I know that our priority one obviously was to solve and put our human capital resources and time towards balancing our budget and augmenting fund balance so we could actually cash flow the lights and provide the benefit to our teachers that was appropriate and to be able to enhance that. And I know our attention as we began to stabilize that challenge was to create a capital plan for assessment of projects and to look more strategically forward with deferred maintenance, needs around facilities, and to project and plan some of that forward for future capital needs. So I know this is maybe responding for you, but I think for the benefit of what we're talking about, that's something that we plan to see in the next 12 to 24 months that would allow us to be more proactive versus taking care of the today. So just sharing with the board.
And
Absolutely.
Part of that will include any remaining bond funds.
Yes.
So yeah, so we have, and it came out of the strategic planning process as well. There was an operations subcommittee, and that was one of the items that they identified as a need for a revisit to what the needs are from a capital perspective for the district. And so we do have about $4 million remaining in existing bond funds. And then we also have another about $5,000 in authorization available to go sell more if we wish to. But my goal in bringing forward any projects before we're able to do that was to only bring forward the things that we absolutely knew that we needed to do and could identify prior, authorization that allowed us to do that. But we are definitely looking forward to being able to do a full needs assessment next year.
4 million remaining. How much more authorized?
At 5 million. Mhm.
A total of 9.
Mhm.
I didn't mean to send us down a rabbit hole. I just.
It's okay. No.
Because I know the community wonders like, well, we just did this, we just did that. What about this? So it might
Right.
just be good, like, put it all out there. I know when y'all have time because it's been kind of crazy.
But I did want to remind the community though, on my previous comment, that the bonds were passed for the purpose of this, the items that were a part of that issue at the time of election. And so we have to adhere to what that looked like at the time unless we take action to amend that, which hasn't been done at this point.
That's correct.
So these planning that we're talking about going forward puts us in a position to the extent necessary, reassess that, but more importantly, adhere to that, that charge we had with that bond.
I'm very supportive of this because we're doing these lovely projections on the M&O fund, which is great. And then I'd love to see what we're going to do with our bond funds.
Yep.
And our facilities and our sports facilities and all that kind of stuff so that we have a comprehensive review.
Yeah, one of the things early on we talked about was previously the lack of clarity going forward, guidance and attention to deferred maintenance, which I would suspect there's a fair amount that we'll uncover and be able to assess beyond adding to what we have, taken care of what we have. So, you know, again, forthcoming. So the current proposal is to act on the Puster Playground project. So I would need a motion or action if we so move. Julie McLaughlin. Second, Jeff Wood, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Thank you, Dr. Duplessis. Item 13 is consider and act on the purchase of wrestling mats. Oh, I knew
Oh, I
that.
got excited.
I knew that. Item 12, consider and act on transportation concrete projects. So sorry.
Okay, last one, I promise. So we shared some pictures and some information at the last board meeting about some of the concrete heaving that we've had in the transportation drive, specifically in the area where the buses are kind of constantly looping through that drive. And so we did get some several quotes, and this is again just those pictures of kind of what that looked like. But in order to properly repair that, we really have to do a concrete replacement because of the heavy buses that are constantly rolling over those areas. And so we did get a couple of quotes, and we would like to ask for your approval for the best value proposal we received, which was from Hawley & Hawley for $38,810.20. And we would like to fund that with remaining balances from the 2017 series, which authorized work at the transportation and maintenance facility. So at this time, it's the recommendation of the administration that the board approve the transportation concrete project.
So I guess a clerical question. Who oversees projects like this and to ensure that they're done and completed to the quality and spec that we request that they be completed to?
That's a good question. So Alex and I.
Okay, thank you. I
Our
was
maintenance
curious.
supervisor and I.
Sidebar, sorry,
Yeah, no.
in the weeds a bit. Any other questions, folks?
This number is smaller than at the last meeting, right?
I think we were estimating about $35,000 to $40,000 in the last meeting, so it's right in line. There was one small area we realized that hadn't been included in the previous quotes when we were comparing everything that we received. And so we did have them come back out and make sure we hit everything that we intended to in the scope.
Does this type of work have warranty associated with it or anything like that? Or what's the expected lifespan of concrete like this? I mean, any idea?
I wish.
I'll let you answer that. I think I know my answer, but I would be telling you.
You just
Yeah.
hope that you have good contractors?
Well, concrete's gonna get hard and crack in Texas, and I think the likelihood of that not happening here is unlikely. I doubt there's much of a warranty on it, but I don't want to preempt your comments.
No, you're absolutely right. And there's really no guarantee for concrete work, especially of this nature, because what you're seeing is, we fill in and we asphalt and we do what we can. But really we've got to cut out sections and re-pour. And so it's not a solid surface. So like, it's not, you might be able to get some type of guarantee on a wholly new lot, but not on a cut and repair like this.
I move to approve the concrete project as presented.
So moved, Mr. James.
Second.
Second, Amy Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now, item 13. I'll jump to it, sorry. Consider an act on the purchase of wrestling mats. Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Before I ask for your vote on the purchase of wrestling mats, I just want to take you kind of through the process from the steps that we've taken just to gather some information from the last board meeting up until today. Some concerns were raised just about the safety of the mats that we were going to purchase. And frankly, we wanted to address the safety of those mats and make sure that we were making the right decision. If you can remember back when this came about as far as replacing the flooring at Sloan Creek Intermediate in the auxiliary gym, we knew that we had to do something with the wrestling program. We visited with Coach Eaton and told him this is what we need to accomplish. So which way do we want to go? He expressed concern about the size of Lovejoy Elementary, which was one of our options, and wanted to stay at Sloan Creek if he could not move to the high school at some facility at the high school. So knowing that we needed to purchase some roll-up mats, we asked him, which was his recommendation, which mats would you like to purchase? He shared that there are two main manufacturers of wrestling mats, Dolomer and Resolite. For the roll-up mats, the lightweight mats, he initially recommended the Dolomer mats. So Coach Ross and I over the past few weeks have gone out and did some site visits at different high schools, visited with some different coaches, just to gather some information on what is the safety of these mats, what is the mobility of these mats. And really the general consensus is the mats that we have at Sloan Creek currently, the permanent mats that we have down in place are the best mats that you can purchase. There's no question about that. Everybody said if you're going to have a permanent mat, or if you have the ability to have a permanent space, these are the best mats to have. With that being said, under the conditions that or under the circumstances that we have, that we need to have the additional space for PE at Sloan Creek, that Dolomer makes a good mat, but Resolite makes a better mat. And so when we got the bid for the Dolomer mat, it surpassed the $50,000 threshold. That when it did that, we had to have an additional quote. Thank you. When we got the quote in for the Resolite mats, it came in at $10,000 above the Dolomer mats. When we asked Coach Eaton, which one do you need? Which one is, he said the Resolite mats are the better mats. When we were out at one of the high schools that were kind of in the same predicament we are, they don't have a dedicated space. They needed to roll up mats. I was able to jump on the Dolomer mats, and they were extremely spongy, for lack of a better word. When I visited with coaches, they said if you cannot have the permanent mats in place, the Resolite mat would be the better mat. And when I asked, were there any concerns about the safety of kids on these mats, they said there were zero concerns about the safety. So it put my mind at ease to purchase these mats. And it also, when visiting with some of the coaches and knowing that if you can't have these, the permanent mats that we have in place, having the Resolite roll-up mats are not much of a downgrade. If it is a little bit less of a mat, but it's not significant enough to be concerned about safety. And so that was their feedback to me. So I just wanted to share that just to be able to, if nothing else, put my mind at ease that we're not putting kids at risk when it comes to putting them on wrestling mats.
And as far as safety ratings and certifications, do these mats carry? Are they
Yeah, so in the
deficient any
presentation here, there's an organization called the American Society for Testing and Materials Institute, or International, I think it may be called. There's an I on the end for Institute or International, one of the two. And they do different types of testings for different materials. One of the materials that they test are wrestling mats. They do different types of testing on these wrestling mats, and they come out with a G-force rating or a G-max rating. Anything over 100 is considered not acceptable. Both the Resolite and the Dolomer are rated. I could not find exactly what they were rated. 0, I don't even know if there is a 0. 0 is best. 100 is not passing. Both of those mats were rated below the 100 G-max rating.
Okay.
That's a question.
Mhm.
This may have already been brought up. So we're going to move to a roll-up mat,
Mhm.
provided the board wants to approve that. What do we do with the permanent mats since we're not using those? Or are those even in good shape after the damage to the floor? And did I miss that? Or maybe-
They are. So we could do a couple of things. We could put them in storage. If at any point in time we do have a facility that we could have permanently, they're in really good shape. We could continue to use those. Coach Eaton said that we could potentially sell them to another school that might want to. I don't know that we want to do that. And then if we do move to a permanent place, have to repurchase them again. So we have a couple of options.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because that was discussed on what to do. So with that being said, our recommendation is to purchase the Resolite mats. Let me go back here. Well, I don't think I have it up. But the Resolite mats, as opposed to the Dolomer mats, the Resolite mats, I don't have the exact dollar amount, is going to be around $10,000 more than the Dolomer, but is what has been recommended if we're going to choose between the two.
And which in total is what?
No,
6409 is what.
No.
I didn't see that.
It's in the executive summary.
Oh, sorry.
before
I was on the presentation. My bad.
Page 2.
But the size is slightly smaller than the permanent mats that are.
Oh, the permanent mats, we would lose a little bit of, right now, at the Sloan Creek, I believe we have, it's considered 3 mats. So it's 3 mats. I think what we're purchasing is 2 mats. So we would lose a little bit of mat space. We would decrease, I think, with the percentage wise about 25% of our mat space. So we would have less mat space. All of the facilities that we visited were much smaller than the Sloan Creek facility. They were all a 2 mat. I don't know the terminology per se, but they were all 2 mats in size. And they said that was plenty of room for the amount of wrestlers that they had. Some of the programs were a little bit smaller than what we have as far as the number of wrestlers. Some of them were a little bit larger, but all of them used basically 2 mat space.
Got it.
Do the permanent mats literally break out into 3 mats?
There's.
Or is it
no,
all one piece?
It's not all one piece. They do roll out. They're just not.
Designed.
I don't even know. Yeah, they're just not designed to roll up. They're the same width-wise, but they don't have the slits in them to be able to roll up. I don't know. I'm not explaining that well.
Well, I was just asking because I wondered if you could leave one of the permanent, if it doesn't impede too much with PE, and then roll out the other 2 so you still have the length of the 3. Is that even a possibility?
Well, it's a big, even one of the mats that we're losing it takes up a,
Too much.
you would decrease the amount of gym space for the PE group that would be needing to use it. Yes. If you did that, you could. Absolutely.
All right. Any other questions? If not, I would need a recommendation.
I move we approve the Resolite mats as presented by Mr. Parker.
So moved, Dan Smith. Have a second?
Second.
Second, Amy Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right. Item 14, consider and act on Texas COVID Learning Acceleration Supports T-Class Program, MOU Decision 4.
Yes, this is an MOU between Mrs. McClendon, a teacher at the high school. She teaches our Principles of Education class and 2 of our Ready, Set, Teach classes. The MOU actually is something that we're excited about. This is to encourage high school students to go into education. And she does get a stipend for that. It'll be $2,500 each year, but we also have a budget of about, I believe it's $13,500 for students. It'll give them opportunity to go to a TAFE, which is the Texas Association of Future Educators conference and that type of thing. And she'll get 3 days of training and work with teachers and curriculum. It's just, we usually don't have opportunities like that. So we're going to ask you if you will please support that and approve the MOU so we can start this work with growing our own existing teachers. And in HR, we are also hoping to, we're going to get out there and motivate them to come back and teach here in Lovejoy ISD and hopefully guarantee them an interview too. So.
All right. Any questions, recommendation?
Are these new courses or we always?
No, we've had them.
Because I recognize race at
Yes.
but I don't know why I recognize
Well,
it.
in last year, in the Principles of Education, known as the PEC class, we had 27 students in it. And then the Ready, Set, Teach class, there's 2 of them. There's 1 and 2. We had 35 students. And that is the practicum class where they go out and work with the teacher and with kids, usually at the elementary level.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is just renewing something that we've done.
We haven't done, this is from the T-class grant, from the COVID. The grant is new, yes. Correct. The classes have been, yes. She's just getting a stipend and we'll be providing more opportunity for our students to get more involved in the association. We didn't have things like this when I was back doing this
Yeah,
30
free
years
money.
ago.
Opportunity to enrich our teachers.
Yeah, it
on
is.
Someone else has done
Yeah.
it, so.
I make a motion, we approve it. That's great.
So moved, Ann Smith. Second, Jeff Wood, all in favor?
Thank you.
Item 15, Student Health Advisory Council Resolution Presentation. Unless I skip something.
Or I'll start us off. So at the May board meeting, I've shared information regarding instructional materials selection process, as well as the health curriculum that has been adjusted or changed, revised for 22-23. So part of that timeline that I presented is that we would be coming forward at the June 20th board meeting to request that the board issue a resolution regarding the SHAC committee assignments for 22-23, adopting the members on that, or voting on the members, and then also for the SHAC to also go review the resolution outlines that they would then review the instructional materials moving forward and come forward with that at the August 29th board meeting. I believe it's a date on that one. So what that means is that basically we just wanted to give you an idea what that resolution would look like. It is in your board book. There's a draft of that. And then we'll bring that forward on the 20th for your review and approval. And then the SHAC would then have 2 public meetings to review the instructional materials that we are putting forward. Okay. Student services.
Any questions on the resolution to charge the SHAC for their services to support us? Next time, correct. This time is for your review and for you to
Right.
ask questions.
So actually materials would not be recommended for adoption until August. So that would just be approval of the resolution for the SHAC to move forward.
So we're putting the SHAC in action with this document.
Absolutely. And then also approve the SHAC membership,
And the
which
members.
last year we did it later in the school year, but we are able to get that going earlier this summer. So
So the one that we approved for last year, did they have any meetings?
We had 2 or 3 meetings.
And those are public posted
They are,
as well.
and recorded. And the recording's posted as well.
Got it.
Audio.
So no action, just questions tonight. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Give the announcements.
All right. With no further action items or announcements, we'll be adjourned.